I see life 1000% different right now than I did back in 2016 and beyond 2016 before. I see life completely different. I see everything through a different lens. And I literally just finished writing a little snippet, I guess, little thought that said we don't see life as it is. We see the life through the beliefs that we have, the beliefs that we hold. We don't see life for what it is. Like life, there's 8 billion people on this planet. We each see like life completely differently. And I hope you that has, that if you haven't listened to enough episodes, I hope this starts to sink in, is that whatever you believe is true for you. And you see life through that lens and through that filter. And I see life today. I turned 50 back in August of 2022, and I see life completely differently at 50 than I did at 43. And that's probably, just the same for anybody. But the point is my beliefs are completely different. And one of the things that's so radically different is the fact that for the first 43 years of my life, I showed up like a victim. I was a victim of everything. I was a victim of my wife, and I was a victim of my kids, and I was a victim of my employer, and I was a victim of my past, and I was a victim of religion, and I was a victim of all these different circumstances. I was just a victim of the economy, victim of the political system, victim of the election. I couldn't be a big enough victim. And that's a pretty painful way to live. And I want to challenge you that if you plead victim of anything, you are making life way harder than it actually is. And you're actually giving away any authority you have over that circumstance and that dimension in your life. And that is, being a victim of anything, like, and I mean, anything. Being a victim is giving away your own sense of personal worth and your personal authority over yourself. And when I look at what, there's a couple concepts that have changed my life and moved the needle and that helps someone shift from, broke to wealthy or failure to successful or, whatever. There's a few concepts, a few things that will completely change the course and the trajectory of your life. But this one matters probably more than anything or just as much as anything. And it's the concept of personal power. Now, when I say personal power, when I say power, now the first thing that might pop up into your mind is power over other people. And that is not what we're talking about. We are not, when I say personal power and I say power, I am not talking in any way, shape, or form about power or manipulation or control or getting anybody else to do what you want them to do. That is coercion, that's manipulation. That is not what I'm talking about when I talk about personal power. When I talk about personal power, and it's a concept that I learned, like I said, back in 2016 when I was trying to figure out who I was going to be and how I was going to navigate the rest of my life, after I decided not to pull the trigger. I was trying to figure out who I was going to be. And one of the concepts, I watched people I learned from people that had put their lives back together after hitting a really dark and bleak spot. And I was taught this concept of personal power. And when I first heard it, I thought they were absolutely insane. And 7 years later, it makes perfect sense. It makes all the sense in the world. And it's something that I practice every single day. Now, let's dive into personal power. Personal power is understanding that you have thoughts, that you have emotions, that you act in certain ways, and only you can control those. Personal power is knowing that you don't see the world as it is. You see the world through your beliefs and your belief system. Personal power is understanding that your internal world, your internal environment does not have to determine how you show up in this world. It's separating what's going on in your body from what's happening outside of you. Personal power is taking full responsibility, accountability, and authority over what's happening in your mind, in your body, in your beliefs, in your life, and never making other people responsible for your well-being. Now let's dive a little deeper. I'm gonna tell you how this, first came about and how I first learned. And this is where I thought my first mentor was an absolute fucking lunatic, because in that time frame, March of 2016, me and my wife were still going head to head, and we were battling, and it was toxic, and it was chaotic, and it was abusive, and our entire marriage was fueled by hate, by just resentment, and it was visceral. And there wasn't love in this marriage. There wasn't the expression of love. I think there was a connection, but there wasn't an expression of love in any way, shape, or form. And what would happen is, I'm just gonna paint a picture. I would be having a good day, and let's say I was just going about my merry way, and I was living in a state of peace, and I was having a good day, and my wife would say, "Mike, you're a piece of shit." And I'm just making this up just to draw and just to paint a picture. But I was having a nice, pleasant day, and my wife would say, "You're a piece of shit." And suddenly I would get angry, and I would start to attack back. "I'm not a piece of shit. You can't call me a piece of shit. Rah, 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 rah." And suddenly there's a fight. There's anger. There's an attack. There's defense. There's attack. There's a parry. There's blame. There's we're flinging insults, all because she said the words, "Mike, you're a piece of shit." Now, some people right now listening to this podcast, yeah, if somebody attacks you, you're going to defend yourself. And this is where, this is where I had to relearn how to live, guys, gals. When somebody's words control your response or how you show up in the world, when someone's words trigger and manipulate your behavior and change your behavior, then you have given up your personal power. You have given up accountability over yourself, and you have given up responsibility and authority for who you are in that moment. Now, I am not saying that when someone says you're a piece of shit, that it doesn't trigger thoughts and it doesn't trigger emotions. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that those thoughts and emotions don't lead to uncontrolled anger, hostility, resentment, and retaliation. So I would have you consider that there is a difference between a reaction and a response. And let me explain. A reaction is immediate. It's an unconscious, I guess you could say, action that is in opposition to what's happening outside of you. So my wife says, "Mike, you're a piece of shit." I say, "I'm not a piece of shit. You're a piece of shit." That's a reaction. There was no breath, no pause. And it was just an absolute reaction to the stimulus that was outside of me. Now, a response is a intentional, purposeful, focused, meaningful, centered, grounded, unemotional action that neutralizes, or I guess mitigates, or engages with this external stimulus in a productive way. Let me explain this. My wife says, "You're a piece of shit." And I say, "I'm not a piece of shit. You're a piece of shit." That's a reaction. But when my first mentor told me this, and he taught me this simple trick. He said, hey, the next time, and I've taught this to 1,000 people at this point because it neutralizes an attack. When somebody says, Mike, you're a piece of shit, or they threaten you or blame you, or they try to guilt or shame, these are all weapons of the weak, by the way. Anger, threats, guilt, shame, blame, all this stuff, right? These are all weapons of the weak. Let me pause this for a second. If you are using guilt and shame, anger, threats, and blame in your life, if you are using them as a weapon, you are weak. If you fling guilt and shame, anger, threats, and blame, you are weak. You are not a man. You are not strong. You are weak. And I'll call you out. If you are using guilt and shame, anger, threats, and blame in any way, you are weak. You have given up your personal power, your personal authority, and all you are is manipulative and abusive to other people. So somebody tries to shame you or guilt you or threaten you, and you say, like they say, you're a piece of shit. You say, no, you're a piece of shit. That's an unconscious reaction. That's weakness. There's no personal power there. That's weakness. But this simple trick, this simple parry, it will diffuse the situation. If somebody says, Mike, you're a piece, they're not going to call you Mike, but Mike, you're a piece of shit. You know what? That might be true. But in this moment, I know you're probably feeling some sense of emotion, and I still love you anyway. Now, that takes an act of courage. That takes an act of strength. That takes an act of understanding that their words cannot reduce your amount of value and worth in this world. And no one's words, no one's actions, no one's behavior, no circumstances, nothing outside of you can reduce, can negatively impact your sense of self-worth, your sense of self-value, your significance, your adequacy, your security. No one outside of you and nothing outside of you can squash or reduce your value. And if you succumb to the circumstances outside of you, and because of the circumstances outside of you, you give up your joy, you give up your centeredness, you give up your groundedness, you give up your internal freedom. If you give up, if what's happening outside of you gets you off balance, then you've just given up your personal power, your personal authority, your responsibility to own yourself. And you're saying at that moment, if you allow these circumstances outside of you to cause you to be shifted off balance for any significant amount of time, and then you react because of that, then what you're saying is, I am a helpless victim. And these circumstances are controlling me and controlling my internal state, and that controls your external state. I hope this is making sense. See, if you look at personal power, it's not just in relationships. It's in, look, I'm an influencer, right? And I've got a social media presence in this podcast, and I'm a speaker and I'm an author. So I take time to put creative content in the world, and I share my perspectives and my beliefs and my opinions. I share myself with the world. I expose, basically, in a lot of my content, I've pulled down my pants and said, here's who I am. Here's all my garbage. Here's my skeletons. Here's all my shit, right? I was physically, mentally, emotionally abusive to my wife and my children. I mean, there was so much. I hurt so many people, and I caused so much pain in this lifetime to people that I said I loved. And I've shared that with the world. And you know what? Sometimes I come in contact with some haters, right? Some people that cast shadows. Now they're not showing up for themselves in the world. They're not casting light in the world. They're not sharing themselves with the world, but they are looking for people who are, and they're looking to tear them down. They're not sharing themselves. They don't have the courage to show up, but they're looking for people who are showing up, and they will tear them down because they're cowards. And when I encounter these haters, I can allow them, if I choose, with a single comment, I can allow them to start to erode my own self-worth and my own self-value and my own self-esteem and how I see myself and how I choose to show up. I can allow them, because of the cowardice that they've demonstrated in hating and casting shadows and in sharing their darkness with me. I can either consume that and accept it and embrace it and allow it to impact me negatively, or I can just let them be miserable in the world without having it get me off center, off balance, off purpose, off intention. And the same thing holds for your wife and your children, your job, your bank account. Who has just been elected, any election, the state of your business, the state of your health, the state of the world. None of these can impact you and your joy and your happiness and your freedom and your ability to maintain your center, your equilibrium and your ground and your personal freedom, your internal freedom. None of these can impact you unless you allow them to, unless you give them a vote and you opt in. And personal power is your ability to stand in the fire with anything and still be okay. It's your ability to see your bank account go up and down and maintain your balance, maintain your center, maintain your equilibrium. It's being able to stand in the presence of someone like saying really harsh and negative things to you and still being okay, holding your center, holding your ground, holding your equilibrium, and maintaining an element of internal personal freedom without harming yourself in the process or needing to defend yourself. And I'm not talking about physical attacks. When someone attacks you physically, you crush them, crush their fucking soul. But if somebody's just attacking you with words or with insults, or someone's just flinging shit, casting shadows, let them have it. They're showing you who they are. They're not telling you who you are. Only you can choose who you are. And personal power is the ability, your ability and your willingness to appreciate and love who you are, regardless of what others say about you or how others feel about you or the opinions and the perspectives or what's happening in your bank account or what's happening in your business. It's detaching your identity, your own identity and your own value and worth that you hold for yourself from everything and everybody and anything outside of you and being okay inside. And personal power is free from needing to use guilt and shame, anger, threats, and blame on the world, on life, in order for you to be okay, in order for you to feel okay. And personal power is running a business for the sake of running a business, for the joy and the excitement and the opportunity to run a business, not as a form of identity, not as a form of security, not as a form of adequacy, not as a form of significance, because if these things waver because of your business, you're giving up your personal power. If you're only okay when your family's okay, you're giving up your personal power. If you're only okay if your business is okay, you're giving up your personal power. If you're okay only when people say positive things about you, you're giving up your personal power. If you're okay in the face of a challenge, you're giving up your personal power. Now, I'm not suggesting you'll ever be perfect at these things. And this is why I say this is a lifelong exercise that we get to embark on. But you've been on this journey since the day you were born until now to find yourself, to accept yourself, to embrace yourself, to choose yourself, to enrich and empower yourself, and to be okay in the presence of external circumstances and challenges and obstacles. I like to call these things headlocks. When you experience challenges and obstacles outside of you, these are headlocks. But if you give up your personal power, you are in a chokehold. When you don't believe in yourself, you are in a chokehold. When you believe that something that you want is not available to you, you are in a chokehold. When you believe that life is your adversary instead of your ally, then you are in a chokehold. If you believe that life has detrimental plans for you, you are in a chokehold, because those beliefs will create your outcomes. You are in a chokehold. You are literally suffocating. You are being strangled from the inside out, and you don't even know it. Headlocks are things that are outside of you that are maybe causing some resistance to your plans and your goals and your vision. But chokeholds are where you are literally suffocating and you don't even know it. And giving up your personal power to anything outside of you, and your personal power is your willingness and ability and ownership and authority over your own internal state. If you give up any of that to things outside of you, you are basically giving up the only power that you own in this entire world, and that's your power over yourself, personal power. If you've never read the book by Viktor Frankl, Frankl, A Man's Search for Meaning, if you've never read that book, do yourself a favor and read that. And now I don't know the exact quote, but I'm going to paraphrase. He said, "This world can take away a lot from you, but there's only one thing that it can't take away. If you opt out, if you don't allow it, there's only one thing that this life cannot take away from you, that this world cannot take away from you, that no one can take away from you. And that's your ability to hold fast and hold steady in your own perspective and in your own personal integrity and your personal power and your ability to be okay in the presence of challenges and obstacles that are put in front of you." And that was a very wordy way to express what's deeply embedded in that book. But Viktor Frankl was a prisoner in Auschwitz and in other concentration camps. And he wrote that book to show that if you want to be okay in changing circumstances, you can be okay. If you're not okay in circumstances outside of you, in challenges and obstacles, it's because you're giving up your only birthright, which is your personal power. And no one's taking it away from you. You're giving it up voluntarily. You're never, ever a victim of giving up your own ability to be okay to somebody else. You don't need life to be a certain way before you're okay. Be okay and surrender to circumstances and obstacles that are relatively outside of your control. Control what you can control and surrender to what you can't. It's a healthy balance. And personal power is knowing what you can control and what you cannot. Personal power is controlling what you can control and surrendering to what you cannot. And changing what you can control to something more favorably, but continuing to surrender to what you don't control, things that are outside of your direct, immediate control, knowing that you can't control them, and thinking that you can will cause you to give up your own personal power and your own personal control and authority and responsibility and accountability over yourself. And it's knowing the difference between those two. If you're ever not okay in the face of changing external circumstances, you've got some work to do to go inside of your mind and body and find out why you feel vulnerable, why you feel raw, why you feel exposed, and why you're scared, and why you would give up your personal power and give up your own security, give up your own adequacy, give up your own significance, give up your own sense of esteem and value and worth to something outside of you. Guys, I hope this makes sense. When I first heard these concepts, it was like, I mean, I figured this was impossible. And I'm not saying I'm 100%. I'm far from 100%, but I'm a lot better than I used to be. You can be too. But first, you have to be aware of the fact that guilt, shame, anger, threats, blame, and trying to control things that are outside of your control by giving up things that are inside of your control, your own personal power, your self-esteem, your self-worth, your self-value, giving up these things, the things out that you can't control. It's a whole different level of insanity, and it'll rob you of joy, rob you of freedom, rob you of peace, and rob you of like true fulfillment in just being okay with life just as it is.